Welcome to this episode of Digital Supply Chain Institute Insights in Action. Today, we are focusing on expanding the knowledge and learning related to supply chain transformation, looking at it from various different angles and aspects. And this time, we wanted to talk about an aspect which has been a little bit neglected over time, has been a little bit put on the side and has been built through experience of people who were part of this general process, which is super important for every successful global supply chain. And that's actually negotiations. With us, we have today Craig Moss, the director in Digital Supply Chain Institute, who actually has done recently a research and a case study with one large enterprise related to phenomenon of negotiations in supply chain evolution. Craig, welcome.
Marko, it's great to be here. I'm really excited to talk about this topic and share what we found.
Thank you very much, Craig. And I think always the practical aspects are something that Digital Supply Chain Institute is focusing on. And apart from our research, we say that we always do the applied research and case studies, which actually connects what we learn with the real case studies. And in that sense, we have seen that the negotiations are a super important part in resilience of today's supply chain evolution, having in mind all the current challenges we see in supply chain, we see in global economies and industries across the board. And in that sense, I would like to ask you, Craig, like from the article you have wrote, which we highly recommend to everybody who is interested in this topic to read on Digital Supply Chain Institute website, is that the biggest difference you have seen with companies who are long-term successful with their teams rather than just individuals is actually building the structure. So can you tell us more about that?
Sure. What was really interesting, if you think about the supply chain department and the procurement function, they're constantly negotiating big contracts with important suppliers, smaller transactional contracts. And what we found was that the organization we worked with had people with tremendous experience, tremendous knowledge, but they didn't have a systematic way to measure how that knowledge was retained and transferred to the other people in the organization. They were really focused on the success of the negotiation, but not the process. So in the work that we did, we started out by developing a framework to be able to measure the process of the negotiation, and then use that to be able to look at the maturity of that process and then how that impacted the outcome.
So it's really great to just disassemble these things in, one side is general thing we look into outcome, but there is a process which is connecting successful outcomes along the way. So that brings me towards the next questions where we can build up on conversation. And, in your article, you have been discussing the importance of preparations for negotiations, right? And for everything we would like to do consistently well, there should be a preparation. And we see that in sports, for instance, right?
Right.
Could you share some best practices that the procurement teams can follow, to ensure that they're fully prepared? Like, the athletes will be having, the programs for, the championship, for Olympics, for whatever comes, but how you do that within your procurement team?
So I think taking a look at this, first we need to think about the overall importance of that negotiation in one, the specific company you're negotiating with, but then within that relationship, the importance of that negotiation. That's going to dictate the amount of preparation. The other things that we looked at really is you need to understand the relationship with the supplier before that negotiation, but also to think how the negotiation changed the relationship. We found some cases where the relationship improved dramatically during the negotiation. The other things that we want companies to think about as they're starting to think about preparation is what is the internal difficulty in gaining alignment? In a lot of cases inside a company, there'll be different departments that really have different vested interests in the outcome. What could be good for one department could be bad for another department. It's really important to gain alignment within your organization in going forward as to what success looked like for all the departments, not just the people actually negotiating the contract. Part of it also is thinking about the communication, right? And both internal and external communication is important. And one of the things we uncovered, which we'll go into a little bit more detail on, is the importance of data, both data in the preparation, understanding the market condition, understanding your condition related to the market and that supplier. But in addition to that, understanding data gaps that you have.
So thank you for mentioning data. You know, we all live in, we know we live today in data economy. And having data and structuring your data, correlating your data builds, let's say, a better way to make decisions and also do the negotiations for sure. But having in mind that you said also that the relationships are improved along the way, how you think or how you can, what you can share with the organizations, how they can stay transparent and true to strategic data without giving that away as a competitive advantage? How you balance the two in today's world?
It's a really interesting point. What we found is that some of the most successful negotiations were really where the two parties were relatively transparent with each other, right? Because and we didn't really look a lot, there's a lot of stuff written on different negotiation strategies in the negotiation, win-win and all those different things. We didn't look at that as much. We looked at the overall process piece of it. And what we found is that companies that understood the data gaps that they had with the negotiating partner and were able to fill those gaps through trading strategic data became more successful. So if I go into a negotiation with you and there's a certain piece that I really need to understand from your side, you might be reluctant to share it. But if I trade something with you that might be valuable to you, that builds more transparency and trust. It helps both of us come to more of a common understanding of how this negotiation is going to impact not only this deal, but our overall relationship. You got to remember in supply chain, a lot of the negotiations that take place aren't single transactional relationships. They're really long-term multi-contract agreements between two possibly very large companies. So in those types of environments, it's really important to also understand the relative importance of the deal you're working on to the overall relationship. And that often dictates, one, the amount of preparation, but two, how high up in the organization do you need to get alignment?
So this is I think, a fundamental thing, and I would like us to round up the discussion actually with it. And what you said, and I'll try to paraphrase, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that in today's world, especially in supply chain negotiations, it's not about transaction and short term, but it's about the long-term relationship, which actually builds the overall resilience of your supply chain. And then on the other side, it's not about winning and losing, but it's actually about finding what data you can trade so you strengthen the relationship and create longer term value for both parties.
Absolutely. I think that that's really an important part to this. And, as companies are becoming more data driven, there's often gaps in the algorithms or in the AI that they're using to be able to facilitate their decision making, data driven decision making. Part of the negotiation can revolve around those types of issues, not only the specific item or service that you're negotiating for, but what data can be exchanged that's going to help both of you achieve better success in the actual, not only the outcome at close, but one of the things that we had this company start to track was success of the negotiation 6 months later. Because a lot of times you can close a deal and people might feel, it's okay or it's great for us. But if it's not working 6 months later, that really wasn't a successful negotiation. So that's an important part. And then to wrap it up, we think it's really important. If you look at process improvement, you really have to think in terms of a cycle of continual improvement. And to do that, what we advocate is if it's a important negotiation, is that companies go back to that score sheet and they start to then score the process on a maturity scale and look at each step of the process, the communication, the preparation, the internal alignment, all those different factors, score it so that they're then able to build up more data around the idea of how the process gets better and what that impact there is on the outcome.
So Craig, let's look into what you said. Let's look into the magic cycle of 6 months. Let's reconvene in 6 months to see how your future work in this area will correlate with what we shared today. And let's see how it evolves, especially having in mind the use of technology and generative AI. Thank you for being with us, Craig. Please carry on the great work and we'll reconvene in 6 months.
It's been a pleasure, Marko. Look forward to it.
This was another Digital Supply Chain Institute Insights in Actions. Stay tuned for more.